In 1950, Joseph Glasco had a one-man exhibition at Pearl's Gallery in New York. The Museum of Modern Art purchased a drawing out of the exhibition and thereby making Joe Glasco the youngest artist ever to have a piece of art in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art. When Glasco arrived in New York in 1949, he was young in his years, but he had just been through the war. He'd fought in the Battle of the Bulge and won a Bronze Star for bravery. He'd traveled the world. He'd discovered his love of the theater and music and all of the arts. And so when he arrived in New York, he had a real sense of confidence. He was confident in the feeling of his own individuality, and with his experiences in the war, this was responsible for his desire to have a lack of pain or drama in his art. I am personally excited that we're able to present this collection, as I've been a fan of the artist since I began to frequent David's restaurants, where the art hanging on the walls really made an impression on me. So 30 years later, when David Chesler walked into the gallery with 50 Glascos, I could not believe it. I always loved the artwork.
These were pictures that we had. It was not we didn't go out to 57th Street in New York and spend $5 million on pictures to put in a little restaurant in University Circle. It was a stroke of luck. We went into the restaurant business and started that place on Bellflower. And a few years later, Club Isabella. It had a very successful run for 35 years, where these pictures hung in the restaurants and was a great success. I had just met Joe in 1968. We became instant friends. We loved each other. We did everything from eating McDonald's every night to traveling around the world. I had been hearing about Jackson Pollock and their friendship from the moment I met him.
From the many nightly discussions within this circle of artists, which often included art critic Clement Greenberg, Jackson Pollock's major supporter, Glasco absorbed specific ideas about the process of painting which he would carry with him throughout his career. While he greatly admired Pollock's work, he was determined not to work in that style, but to find his own individual manner. And to do this, he applied a self-mandated discipline. Physically, Glasco worked in painstaking detail, using a single small brush and a laborious building up of surface texture.
He was not afraid of work, and he was not afraid of putting 50 million dots on a painting, one at a time. And I think that was because the paintings were alive.
So this picture is titled Ariadne, and it's a work from about 1970. Here you have the classical, mythological subject matter, and for typical of Glasco, the figure is monumental. It's filling the whole picture plane, and it's a very serene depiction of the goddess. In the background, though, it's very detailed. And what you see in the background is this very deliberate gestural marking that is incredibly intricate, but if you look closely, you'll see how much work actually goes into this picture. The classical subject matter was influenced by Joe's many summers he spent in Mykonos, in the islands of Greece.
We went to the opera. We loved it. We waited 4 hours in line to see Birgit Nilsson at the Met.
In the late 50s and into the 60s, Glasco's work changed in style. It was at this time that he made sculptures that, although small in size, had a monumentality of form. He tries to synthesize his own work out of cubism and surrealism, resulting in works such as The Death of Procris and The City. He continues to use mythology and classical and biblical themes, and while most other artists were fully committed to abstract work, Glasco would never abandon subject, making him a leader of a movement that would come to be called figurative expressionism. Well, this piece is entitled The City, and it's one of the earlier works we have in this show. It's from 1963, and this is Joseph Glasco's period of surrealism. Early to mid-century modern painters were trying to make a new style out of surrealism and abstract expressionism, but you can see certain forms that he brings through all of his work. This piece is called Big Diamond, and it's dated 1980, and this is sort of the last iteration of Glasco's work, and he returned fully to using color, and what he would do is paint canvas and then cut it up into strips. With big buckets of Elmer's glue, he would just make a collage. He called it adding and subtracting. So he would add pieces of canvas to the work, and then the subtraction part was when he would cover up things he'd done.
And he was not looking for people to interview him and make him famous or anything. He didn't want any of that. Didn't want magazine articles, didn't want interviews, didn't want to talk to social groups or any of that stuff. Joe was an early inspiration for Julian Schnabel. Julian loved Joe and Joe loved him. Later he dedicated his film Basquiat to Joe. And there's a portrait of Joe by Julian called Some Matadors Get Closer to the Horns. There was a lot to admire about Joe. He expressed himself beautifully on canvas, and he was incredibly articulate.
Another big collector of Glasco's work was Stanley J. Seeger.
Stanley Seeger was a different case. They were friends from childhood, and Stanley bought wonderful things. I've seen Francis Bacon triptych in Stanley Seeger's house. I've seen a Renoir, I've seen Degas. He had Napoleon's couch, and in the picture in the book, you see Joe Glasco sitting on that couch under a painting of one of his great paintings, Salome and her mother.
While the quality of Glasco's artwork and much of his career mirror many of the icons of the American 20th century art world, there are perhaps many reasons why Glasco is less known today than some of his contemporaries. But certainly it may be because of his constant need to flee the New York scene, his independence, his self-assuredness, his lack of regard for the critics who could make or break an artist, and how much his open homosexuality affected his career. This collection of 50 Glasco works provides collectors a fresh view into American painting in the mid-20th century art world. We're happy to be able to exhibit this wonderful collection and to see again not only an artist who created beautiful works of art, but who was a part of the art history of 20th century America.